So this is a tough issue because it goes to the core of who we've always been as a people, which is a nation that serves as a beacon of hope and inspiration to those that are fleeing oppression. The flip side of it is that we also have to provide for our own national security, and nothing can supersede that. My problem with the migrants is in the migrant situation is not that we don't want to accept migrants, it's that I'm not sure we can. In fact, I'm increasingly convinced we can't, at least at this stage in the process.
You're watching Inside Story. I'm Ray Suarez. Tonight on the program, we're looking at the national debate over accepting Syrian refugees. Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who's also running for president, says if even 1 out of 10,000 refugees set to come to America is ready to bring violent extremism to the United States, the 10,000 shouldn't come. He says there's no way to screen refugees well enough to guarantee that none want to commit murder in the U.S. Is there a values component to the question of whether we accept people fleeing a war-torn country? A diplomatic aspect, as the United States has taken almost no refugees from the Syrian conflict, while friends and allies are taking millions. Joining me now for the rest of the program, Horace Cooper, a research fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research, Ian MILLHISER, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Mr. MILLHISER is also justice editor for Think Progress, and Melanie Nezer, Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at HIAS, a refugee aid organization. Well, let's talk legalities first. Horace Cooper, can governors say no?
Well, governors can stand up and object, and they have some control over their own resources. But legally, this is a decision that the government, the United States government, does uniformly, and that is the policy of the law.
Ian MILLHISER, I spoke briefly with the mayor of Santa Fe about it, but in practical terms, even if they can't legally say no, could they make it just more difficult to do a resettlement policy if they're saying we don't want them here?
They could make it somewhat more difficult. So, you know, as Horace said, the federal government gets to decide who is legally allowed to be in this country, and once someone is admitted, they're free to travel within the United States. But there's a resettlement process. States will sometimes assist in that resettlement process, and if a state doesn't want to cooperate, that does make it more difficult. Now, I don't see why it's good policy, and I frankly don't see how it makes us safer if we have a bunch of folks who it's very difficult to settle them because people are making the process more difficult, as opposed to having them come into communities and, you know, begin to assimilate into that community. But yeah, I mean, there are things at the margins that states could do to make it more difficult. They can't actually stop refugees from coming in.
Well, Horace, several presidential candidates who are also members of the Senate are voicing their objection, and the Speaker of the House, the new Speaker Paul Ryan, says he'd like to find a way to put a pause on this policy. Does it get more difficult for President Obama if the national legislature moves in that direction?
Absolutely. There is a culmination of concerns. Bloomberg today has released a poll, and it shows that a 2-to-1 objection on the part of the American people. There's a bipartisan objection, not just Republican governors, there are Democrat governors, and the legislation that is being considered by Speaker Ryan and also by Mitch McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate, will have some Democrat supporters and sponsors of that legislation. There is a real problem, and I just want to make this point. When you go to bed, when I went to bed last night, just as I was turning in, and I saw 2 jets, one from LAX and one from Washington Dulles, have to be diverted because of bomb threats, and I know that the FBI directors indicated that we are under, here in Washington, D.C., a special watch for terrorism by ISIS. We have to take this action seriously.
Melanie Nezer, does the fact that this is even a debate at all, put a special kind of spotlight and a special kind of pressure on agencies that resettle people?
Well, of course it does. I mean, it's really unfortunate, I think, that in this short period of time you saw after the really tragic events in Paris and Beirut over the weekend, but mostly the world was focused on Paris. The governors on Monday, really one after the other, started saying, we don't want refugees, we don't want refugees. And I think it reflects a real fundamental lack of understanding about what the refugee resettlement program is, how carefully vetted these refugees are. Less than 1% of all of the world's refugees will ever get resettled into a third country. Getting in line, being selected, you don't apply to be a refugee to be resettled, you are selected. and then referred to the U.S. for resettlement or another country for resettlement, and then go through extensive security screening
But
processes.
can your agency, HIAS, imagine doing that work in a state where the governor has already announced he does not want those people in the state?
Well, HIAS and the 8 other refugee organizations, most of which are faith-based, the evangelical community, the Catholic community, the Jewish community, the Lutherans, we're all involved in refugee resettlement. Also humanitarian-based organizations are involved. We partner directly with local and state governments, but really this is a community-based effort. This is something that local communities, as you heard from the mayor, believe in. This is the law actually requires, or the State Department requires extensive consultations between the resettlement agencies, the local governments, the service providers, the schools, to make sure that each community is ready for the refugees when they come. So the state plays an important role. In most cases, we haven't had any problems at the state level. The states have been very supportive of these programs. So to see all of a sudden this attention, you know, this is something that we do at a community-based level. This is a public-private partnership, and there's a lot of support for this in the communities.
Yes, stay with us. The Obama administration has insisted it's going ahead with its plan to accept Syrian refugees, but what does it mean when the chief executive of a state is telling you he or she will not cooperate, will not help? Are there roadblocks to an effective program, even if the states can't legally stop the move? Wretched refuse? It's tonight's Inside Story. Welcome back to Inside Story. I'm Ray Suarez. We're discussing the continuing debate over accepting Syrian refugees in the United States. The war is now 4 years old, and the United States has accepted and resettled only about 2,000 of the millions who fled the war-ravaged country. Following the Paris attacks, most American governors now say they'll oppose resettling Syrians in their states. President Obama believes it can be done safely. Ian MILLHISER, Horace Cooper, and Melanie Nezer are still with me. Ian MILLHISER, can it be done safely?
Well, the refugee program has an extraordinary record of success to this point. There's been between 700,000 and 800,000 refugees accepted since 9/11. 0 of them have committed a terrorist attack. There were 3 examples of refugees that were arrested. 2 were plotting something in a different country, not in the United States. The 3rd was arrested for a plot that really wasn't particularly credible, and they were stopped. So 3 out of about 800,000. That is an extraordinary success rate. That is a better success rate than you're going to find among ordinary Americans. More than 3 in 800,000 Americans are murderers. Let me finish. The other point that I will make is that the best thing for America's national security, this isn't just about values, the best thing for America's national security is to participate in this program. And the reason why is because ISIS's pitch is that there is a clash of civilizations between the Muslim world and the Western world, that we hate them, that we hate Muslims, and if you want to recruit, if you want to write ISIS's propaganda, then you say the things you hear coming from people like Ted Cruz, that we're going to accept Christians and not Muslims. You say that Muslims collectively must bear the blame because of things that European citizens did in France. None of the people who committed the bombing in Paris, who have been
Syrian
identified.
nationals, certainly.
Yeah,
Let me give Horace Cooper a chance to respond.
Couple things. One, the actual numbers over the last 18 months, there have been 66. You just have to go to the Department of Justice website where they announce the indictments that they are pursuing. 66 ISIS-related attacks, and of those, half a dozen of them were self-identified refugees, 3 of which indicated that they were trying to support activity specifically in Syria. So we got to be careful about that.
To be fair, many of those people who are called ISIS-related by the Justice Department are native-born Americans, born in places like Minnesota and Oklahoma.
As I said,
originally Bosnian nationals who came in the 90s during the falling apart of Yugoslavia. I mean,
half a dozen in 18 months is not a winning strategy. And the second point is our FBI director himself testifies that we don't presently have. The issue here is that this resettlement program is being botched by the administration's failed Syrian and national security policy. We should never be having to have this kind of uprising if the administration wasn't engaging in what clearly looks like amateur hour and not a serious attack on handling the national security interests of America.
I'd like to just give a little context for how the refugee program works, because I think we're conflating a lot of issues here. First of all, it's 3 million refugees since 1980. The most law-abiding cohort of non-citizens that have come to the U.S.
And where have they come from?
They've come from all over the world. They've come from Vietnam. They've come from the former Soviet Union. They've come from many countries in the Middle East. Most recently, the translators and others who helped us in Iraq have been brought here with special interest by our veterans who wanted to bring those people who are still at risk in Iraq to join them in the United States and be safe. So this is a program that spanned the globe. I'll also say that the refugee resettlement program is different. We see people coming into Europe and entering through border patrols and border checkpoints. This is a quick kind of process where people are quickly accessing the European territory. In the U.S., we have the luxury of geography. We actually go out and we select the people that we want to bring to this country. Those people have been referred to us by the UN. Half of the people that the UN screens are screened out at that point because they say we're not 100% sure that the U.S. is going to want these people for whatever reason. Then the Department of State gets involved, and there's interviews at that point. Then the security checks get started. Then the Homeland Security officer comes out and does an interview and does another check to make sure the person is actually a refugee and is admissible. During this time, there are literally dozens of security checks that happen. And then the person may be able to get on a plane, eventually go to the United States, where organizations like HIAS, where I work, which is the Jewish refugee organization, but like I said, most of them are from a range of faiths or humanitarian organizations, we'll meet them at the airport. I don't know if that we're allowed to do that anymore in these states, but we welcome them at the airport. We show them where their apartment is. The community has donated goods for those apartments and volunteered to help these new families adjust to life in the United States.
Let me get some quick response whether just one mistake could unravel this whole thing, Ian MILLHISER. Does it put a kind of pressure that's unusual for refugee resettlement programs?
I mean, it's certainly true that if a mistake happens, that would be horrible. And that is why I am glad that this program has the record of success that it has had since 1980. The idea that we're going to solve this problem through belligerence, I mean, it's important to understand why ISIS exists. It exists because we invaded Iraq. It exists because we decapitated its leadership, which is terrible.
You're taking us someplace else, Ian.
Okay, just really quick.
20 seconds.
The policy that the Congress is putting together, the president could save this process and prevent the metastasization that's occurring if he simply said, yes, I will support those changes. I will sign that law, and we will allow that to happen quickly.
We're out of time. I want to thank my guests, Horace Cooper of the National Center for Public Policy Research, Ian MILLHISER of the Center for American Progress, and Melanie Nezer of HIAS. I'll be back in a moment with a final thought on refugees and what it means to offer refuge. Stay with us. It's Inside